Hey everyone, welcome back to episode 4 of the Controller Collective podcast. Today we've got a very interesting topic for you, which is our first debate. During the creation of this podcast, we kind of tossed around a bunch of ideas, and one of them was that we would periodically have debates against each other. So our first debate is going to be between me and Peyton, and it's a debate we've had plenty of times before, and that is Breath of the Wild versus Tears of the Kingdom. Which is the better Nintendo Switch Zelda game?
Ooh,
Yay!
Thank you.
get hyped,
Thank you.
boys. First debate.
Uh, that just to kind of tease that before we get into that, I did kind of want to mention that we had a Nintendo Direct yesterday.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone was expecting.
Yeah, no, it got announced like the day before, right? 2 days before?
Yeah, it was announced on Wednesday and it happened on Thursday.
Yeah. And if you guys didn't know, we record these like in a week in advance.
So yeah, by the time you're listening to this, everything about the Switch 2 is already known.
Yeah.
But we're just going to kind of talk about it a little bit. There weren't too many big announcements.
No.
So we'll just go over kind of the small stuff that they announced. I wanted to start with, they talked about virtual game cards, their new solution to online games.
Yeah, it's funny because
Talon doesn't know anything about the
I
Direct
don't
because he
know
didn't watch it, by
anything
the way.
about it. I'm
didn't
like
watch it.
actively Googling. No, I didn't. I didn't have time.
I actually was going to if you were going to open the floor to suggestions, it's funny because I was actually going to say we should start with that first as well. It's it was really interesting like watching that part of the thing live um because there's like a thing where I'm like, what is this? And then I was like, oh, this seems kind of dumb. And I was like, oh, it's just kind of like the Steam family count, like a little bit. You guys know what I'm
Yeah,
talking about?
the
Yeah.
section was Nintendo explains game sharing in the most complicated way possible.
Yeah, pretty much. The only thing that made me go, wow, that's kind of stupid was that when you like let somebody else in your family plan borrow a game or whatever, it returns automatically after a certain amount of time. Like, if is it hours or days?
2 weeks, I think they said.
14
Yeah,
days.
14 days. Because to me, I'm like, why does it like, why couldn't
I
you?
think you can go ahead.
I was just gonna say, why couldn't you just have it that the person who actually owns the game can like revoke it at any time they wanted instead of like setting a timer. I'm sure you'd probably be able to revoke it before the timer's over, but why not be able to just revoke it at any time and not have a timer?
I think the person who has the game currently lent to them can send it back at any point before the 14 days.
Hmm.
The main thing I wanted to talk about with this is if you go to the website for virtual game cards, Talon, I think you're already there.
Yes.
If you scroll all the way down to the bottom, I'm going to go to the website.
What's the website?
Just look up virtual game cards and it should come up. So you'll scroll down and you get to the double asterisk part. It says compatible systems must be linked to a Nintendo account to use virtual game cards. Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive games and Nintendo Switch 2 edition games can only be loaded on a Nintendo Switch 2 system. Is that them confirming that Switch 1 games are going to have upgraded ports on the Switch 2?
I believe
Oh,
so.
or at the very least, when they release new games, maybe they'll have like a downscale version for Switch One.
Like a dual release thing?
Yeah, and well, and that would make a lot of sense actually because historically Nintendo, whenever they put out a new console, they like um still support their old console. We saw this with the 3DS. We saw this with the Game Boy Advance because a lot of times when they take like risks with new consoles or whatever, they still have some support in their old consoles in case the new one doesn't do good. just as like a backup, and then they ditch it when the successor uh, succeeds in excelling its previous console.
Yeah, definitely. But I just thought that was interesting that they kind of maybe showed their hand a little early there.
Yeah, for sure. And I could also see maybe they just like start pitching the Switch 1 as like um kind of like as a what's the word I'm looking for? Like a
A
cheaper
budget
altern
option.
yeah, like a cheaper alternative.
I do think they'll support the Switch One. I mean, obviously, because we had this direct and there are games being announced for Switch One into 2026.
Hmm.
So they're obviously going to be supporting Switch One for a few months at least for the rest of the year and into 2026.
Yeah. I'd just be and like I think the same thing happened with PlayStation 5, right?
They're still supporting the PS4.
Yeah. So like I guess it's not that surprising really when you think about it. Um Yeah, that's a really nice catch on your part. I don't know if you like saw that somewhere or if you personally saw that, but that's really interesting.
I did. I did. I didn't. I can't claim that one for myself, but I did see that.
Hmm.
Uh, there weren't a lot of like big game announcements, obviously, because they're saving them all for Wednesday. But they talked about Metroid Prime 4, still no release date for that. Pokemon Legends ZA, still no release date for that. And then their two other big games were Rhythm Heaven Groove and and Tomodachi Life. Something Dream Home.
Um, Shout out to that poor Twitter.
Living the dream.
Yeah, living the.
Yes,
Shout out
that's what it
to that
was.
poor Twitter user who said, "Everyone who replies to this tweet, I will buy Tomodachi Life 2 if Nintendo announces it."
Shoutouts.
Someone did the math, and like, if he actually followed through, it'd be like $900,000 in the hole.
Yeah, and then their final announcement was the new news sharing app that they have already launched called Nintendo Today.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting pick for the last thing to announce.
I mean, they've already started using it for big announcements. I don't know if you guys saw this, but on Nintendo Today, they shared the release date for the live action Zelda movie.
Oh, oh,
There's a
so
Zelda movie?
you didn't know about that?
No.
Yeah, like a year ago, they announced there was going to be a live action
To
Zelda
be fair,
movie.
they announced that on Twitter.
Yeah, so they didn't post this release date on Twitter, which makes me think, maybe they're moving away from Twitter and stuff, and this is going to be their replacement.
Yeah, that's what I figured. I figure for whatever reason, the CEOs must like having just like a place where they can throw stuff out, like smaller stuff out. And that's why they started doing that with Twitter. And I suspect they were like, well, we should probably distance ourselves from Twitter for obvious reasons. So they're like made their own app, which is interesting. Oh, what's the release
Yeah,
date they
this
announced?
uh 2 years from now, March 26th, 2027.
That's a ways.
Yeah, that's a ways away. I believe it's like a week after Sonic Movie 4, so
Oh, stiff competition. And it's live action.
huge.
Who knows that it'll be any good, but
They also said in the direct that after the Switch 2 direct, they will be posting news about the Switch 2 on the Nintendo Today app. So they really want people to be using it.
yeah. And I can see like how they're trying to like kind of I guess force people to get the app in a way so they can get that news for Switch 2 because once this like once that direct comes out, like the hype for Switch 2 is going to well, this sounds kind of cringe to say, but the hype for Switch 2 is going to become real. So
Yeah, I'm guessing, we'll have the release date, we'll have all the information about the console.
mhm. Can't wait for that direct.
But I mean, it's already happened if you think about it.
Oh,
That's kind of it for me on the Nintendo Direct, unless you guys have anything else to say. There wasn't a big Direct. Final swan song to the Switch One, I guess.
yep. I wanted to put this little nugget here, I suppose. Thanks to everybody who potentially joins us on the live streamed reaction to that direct, since this will be
Yes.
released after that occurrence. So thank you for everyone who
Thank
tuned in.
you, future slash
Thank
past
you.
people.
Yes. um, just I guess my only words on direct is like I'm excited for the new Rhythm Heaven and new Tamagotchi Life. Um, that's about it, really. Like it was mid with a connotation of positive, not mid like meaning bad, but it was fine. Like especially for something we didn't know was going to happen. So
Yeah, for a Direct that nobody expected, I think it was better than expected.
yeah, I saw a meme that was like, "Oh boy, two cakes," reacting to the direct, and that's how I feel.
All right, shall we get into our actual topic now after a little bit of a detour?
Yeah, our little tay to tay, or however you say that.
I'm not sure how we want to start this off, so I'll just say I will be taking the role of Tears of the Kingdom. I think Tears of the Kingdom is better than Breath of the Wild.
And if it's not obvious, I'll be taking the side of Breath of the Wild in this one.
And I will be the mediator. I will
Yes.
ask them both hard hitting questions about their stances, see if we can come to a conclusion, or maybe an agree to disagree.
Yes. And maybe even throwing some punches himself if he feels like it.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess to start, um, let's just hear about why each of you like preferred the game, like just basic summary.
Mm.
Jarek, you want to go first?
Sure, I will go first. So I think for me with Tears of the Kingdom, in my eyes, it is a strict upgrade to Breath of the Wild. To me, there is no reason why I would go back to play Breath of the Wild when I can experience almost all of it in Tears of the Kingdom. Tears of the Kingdom has the same map as Breath of the Wild, but expanded both above and below the world. To me, there's better story, there's better combat, and the implementation of Ultra Hand, which is the power that lets you stick things to each other, opens like so many possibilities for how you want to experience the game that I think it's just better.
All right, Peyton.
Um, so, um, sorry, I'm tripping over myself. I really enjoyed Breath of the Wild in the sense that, on one hand, we had never had anything like it at the time. Um, no like truly open world Zelda game ever like it, and it was a brilliant open world game, like some of the best that was ever made. And to me, a lot of Breath of the Wild, just like the name kind of suggests, is um, environmental storytelling and just fully selling the setting of Breath of the Wild, not only within the Zelda timeline, but just this idea of Hyrule being in ruins, that you're walking these places that once had a big population of people of a once civilized land, and seeing how far it has fallen with the absence of the hero of time. Um, and everything in the game is specifically made and tailored to build up that atmosphere, from the music to the visuals to the gameplay, and all of that really all just comes together in a beautiful way to make such an artistically beautiful game, from the way it tells its story, the things you can do, and um, what it tells just through its music and the atmosphere.
Would you argue that Tears of the Kingdom doesn't do that, on the other hand?
That is, I would say it does not do that nearly as well as Breath of the Wild did because it's not its focus as a game. Um, and my number one like thing about that, which is something that me and Jarek have argued about before, is Ultra Hand because I feel like Ultra Hand ruins the tone of the game because it's so cartoonish. It's such all the abilities Ultra Hand gives you is just so cartoonish to me, and it kind of ruins any chance the game had to like recreate the environmental storytelling that Breath of the Wild had. And I do think there's an argument to be made that maybe that was not what they were going for because they were kind of going for more of a vibe of like rebuilding Hyrule after you already beat Ganon. So I don't know if they were really going for the same vibe they were going with Breath of the Wild. But for me, that's what I loved so much about Breath of the Wild, and they just kind of ruined that tone. Even I think with like the fighting music and stuff like that is not as and just mm, it's been a little while since I played Tears of the Kingdom, so if I'm putting my foot in my mouth, I'm sure Jarek will call me out on this. But just to me, like building these wacky machines and driving around Hyrule just makes it so cartoonish and just ruins what I loved about Breath of the Wild and what I was hoping would be expanded upon on something that was called its sequel.
I mean, I do think Ultra Hand is definitely like a very polarizing kind of upgrade that Link got in Tears of the Kingdom. I know some people, like my mom, hates Ultra Hand. It literally made her quit playing the game after like 3 hours. She couldn't stand it. But Jarek, you seem to really like that ability.
I do. I think Ultra Hand is very creative and very like a lot of games don't allow you to do that. Like there is nothing like it. Like Peyton said about Breath of the Wild. There's not a lot like Tears of the Kingdom with Ultra Hand. You literally have endless possibilities. You can make something serious and helpful and practical that lets you explore the world, or you can make something funny, like attaching a rocket to a Korok to launch it into space. And I think that really allows for like player expression. It allows you to make your experience yours and be creative with how you want to experience the game.
Peyton, you have anything to say to that?
Well, I think that's actually a pretty respectable opinion because I think when it is kind of creating like expanding on that idea that they put in Breath of the Wild, where they're like, yeah, you could run straight to the to Hyrule Castle at the beginning of the game and beat the game within like 10-15 minutes if you really wanted to. So like just I can see where Nintendo and where Jarek's coming from, and it's a good point to say that you're really expanding player expression and that feeling of like being totally free to do whatever you want, like be as goofy as you want or be as serious as you want, I guess. But just in my case, I feel like a lot of the fusions didn't feel like they were that serious or like that you could build that serious of things. Like, I guess to me, just the tone's a little off with all of the fusions they did. I don't know. I will like concede that this is a really good point on Jarek's part.
Yeah, I like I said before, I think some people really love Ultra Hand and the way it allows for a lot of player expression. But on the other hand, a lot of people just don't like it. Maybe they don't fully understand how to use it, or they just don't like the kind of gameplay that it encourages. I personally was on the side of not liking it as much at the start. I might revisit the game at some point because I only got a couple hours in. I don't think I ever got to the point where I was very comfortable using it. Um, I might just need to spend more time using it to enjoy it.
Mhm.
One other thing that I've heard some people talk about is that Tears of the Kingdom didn't really fit as a sequel to Zelda. I know there's not necessarily been that clear of a order of games of Zelda games in the past. Um, do either of you have anything to say to that?
Well, yeah, I do. Um, One of the biggest things in tone that upset me, um, just like as a sequel to Breath of the Wild, was that um, a lot of people just never ever talk about what happens in Breath of the Wild. And a lot of NPCs don't recognize Link at all for some reason and don't talk about what happened in the first game at all. And I just think it was a really weird stance to take on making a sequel game, to just have all these people not know who Link is, like as if this is a sequel to the type of playthrough of Breath of the Wild where someone just went straight to Hyrule Castle and didn't talk to anyone and didn't do anything. There was just so many instances for me in Tears of the Kingdom where I was like, I know you. I helped you in the first game. Like, why are you acting this way towards me? Why don't you remember who I am? And I also just think the complete like destruction of any uh like the towers, like the any of the Sheikah tech that was in one, just like disappearing into in or in Tears of the Kingdom. I was using one and two just as shorthand there. Um, to me, that I think that was a really big frustration to me because I was like, uh, why do you want to like make a sequel game but not really make it that clear of a sequel to the first game in a lot of aspects, to me at least. um yeah.
Okay, I will concede that the sequel status is one of the weaker points on Tears of the Kingdom side because you know, they don't bring up Calamity Ganon, who's like the main antagonist. And I think I don't even know if he gets brought up at all in the story of Tears of the Kingdom.
Mm.
But I do also think Peyton is blowing the issue a bit out of proportion because it's not like nobody remembers Link. All of the main NPCs do remember Link. You know, you got the four sages like Sidon and the Goron guy that I don't remember the name of, and Impa remembers you. Even the guy who you helped build a town for him in Breath of the Wild, he remembers you. You helped him get married in Breath of the Wild, and now he's got a daughter in Tears of the Kingdom, I think. So in that way, it does kind of respect the game that came before it. But I will admit that there are faults in the main story aspect. But a lot of the characters do remember Link,
Do you guys?
so I think
Oh,
that issues. No, go ahead.
do you think? Do you guys think that maybe Legend of Zelda would have been better here to add a similar kind of system to Mass Effect, where you can import your saves from previous games and it'll have impacts on the second game?
It's interesting that you bring that up because that was actually one of the rumors around Tears of the Kingdom that I really bought into, which was why I like went through and did like a really good playthrough of Breath of the Wild. I remember I did that specifically because I was hoping that they would have a sort of imported save system into the sequel, because I really wanted them to fully focus on it being a sequel to Breath of the Wild. And I think kind of the way that Nintendo went instead was um, taking the idea of Breath of the Wild and giving it um, l- like focusing more on gameplay aspects, and how to improve those, rather than fully thinking about. Oh, I'm kind of losing my train of thought. I don't think it's the strongest argument that I'm making right now, but I think you guys kind of get my point.
Okay, but hear me out. You can transfer your horses from Breath of the Wild to Tears of the Kingdom. That's the only thing you can transfer over.
I can get my skeleton horse. Woohoo!
Nope, because you can't register that in a stable.
No!
But I think it'd be hard to implement that kind of system just based on the wide range of things you can do in Breath of the Wild. Like, if you want 100% Breath of the Wild, that will take you probably like 50 to 100 hours just to do and see everything in the game. So I think they would have to account for a lot if they wanted to do that kind of system, which is why I think they didn't go with that.
Yeah, I feel like that kind of system works a lot better in games where your actions directly have an outcome on the narrative of the story. So I don't know if it would necessarily work out a lot in Tears of the Kingdom, since the only real benefit would be the characters would remember what good deeds you've done for them, which, while that's cool, it's also a lot of extra time and effort going into the back end side of the game that might not be appreciated that much by all the players.
Yeah, and don't forget, Tears of the Kingdom also got delayed like 3 times.
Yeah.
So
It'd probably get delayed for another 6 months to a year if they tried to add all that custom stuff based on your playthroughs of Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not even necessarily like me wanting, um, like that level of like being able to transfer on 100% run and having that really affect, like maybe give you some benefit or something like that. Like just like something that slightly acknowledges like that you 100% at the last game, I guess, in some factor. But I just wanted there to be, I guess, just in general, as I've already stated, I suppose. I just wanted there to be more of an in depth connection between the two games. And for whatever reason, Nintendo decided that's not really the path they wanted to take with a sequel. And that's like one of the biggest things that just didn't sit right with me about the game.
So, would it be safe to say that, like, one of the main reasons you're not a huge fan of Tears of the Kingdom is just because it wasn't necessarily what you expected it to be?
I think that's a fair statement. Yeah. But it's not like I didn't give it a fair shake. Like, I got right up to the final boss and then just lost interest in the game at that point and stopped.
come on, you got all the way there. You
You
didn't
get to
finish
the
it.
boss and then you stop?
Well, more accurately, I didn't get like right to the boss. I got to the point where you can go to fight Ganon or whatever to the hole, and then I stopped.
I never got that far in the game. I got past, like, the tutorial section, I flew to the ground, and then I went to a bridge where there was a dragon, tried to fight it, and then I died, and then I just quit. All right, one more talking point, the music in the games. Do either of you think that adds or detracts from one of the games?
I think they're both great soundtracks, and I think they both try and do different things. Breath of the Wild soundtrack is very atmospheric, you know. One of the most memorable songs is like the riding the horse theme, or even the Guardian theme is an iconic one.
Yeah.
And I'll admit that I don't think there's anything that instills fear in Tears of the Kingdom like the Guardian theme does, but I think Tears of the Kingdom has better music elsewhere. I think one of my favorite tracks from the game is the Colgera theme, which is the boss of the Wind Temple. That theme is peak.
Mhm.
And I think boss music is 100% improved from Breath of the Wild, and even combat music in general, aside from the Guardian theme.
Well, in Breath of the Wild, there was really only one boss theme, right? I don't think there was.
I think so, because every boss was kind of just Calamity Ganon.
Yeah.
And that's something we can talk about later, is that the bosses are way better in Tears of the Kingdom.
Mm.
Speaking of bosses,
Well,
do you
hold
think?
on.
Oh,
You didn't let Peyton talk about the music.
Yeah,
sorry.
no. I was going to concede that I think me and Jarek actually have a really similar opinion on this, which is that both soundtracks are really good and both soundtracks are trying to do something different, like Jarek said. So in that matter, we definitely do agree. Um, I would just like to say that like the way I think Breath of the Wild uses music is so uh, great. Like with the Guardian theme, there'll be all of a sudden that frantic piano run, and then the mechanical nature of the following actual melody and everything that goes along with it, and then the slow fade out, along with the slow fade out in and out of a town, hearing the town theme. Like Jarek said, it's all really atmospheric. And I'd also like to bring up the brilliant use of leitmotifs in the Guardians themes, because each Guardian has their own theme that's kind of all connected into a larger theme, and you can hear these leitmotifs well, I'm kind of getting into music theory here. I don't know if you listeners know what a leitmotif is, but it's a reoccurring melody that's associated with a character, basically, if I had to summarize it really quickly. And Breath of the Wild's use of leitmotifs in foreshadowing like Guardians and the Guardians' descendants and stuff like that, and these small little musical moments are all like really ingenious to me. And nothing it might be just because I don't have as much hours in Tears of the Kingdom as I do Breath of the Wild, but nothing like those leitmotifs and these moments that are really backed up by that music really stands out to me in Tears of the Kingdom. It is memorable for me in Breath of the Wild.
Do you think maybe it was less of a priority for the developers in Tears of the Kingdom, or
I think, like Jarek said, in Tears of the Kingdom, they were going for a lot different vibe from the like atmospheric vibe of Breath of the Wild. And I do remember some people criticizing some of the music of Breath of the Wild just because they're like, well, it's so atmospheric. And so I think in a way, um, it improved, like with the boss songs not being the same every time, and just making, I guess, less atmospheric and more like standout music in a way for bosses and things like that. But it was just a different priority for them in the second game.
any last words on that topic before we move to the next one, Jarek?
I know it's a bit late, but I just want to put this out there that I don't hate Breath of the Wild or anything.
Yeah, and I want to
I
put out
truly,
I want to put it out there too that I don't hate Tears of the Kingdom. It's just not my thing.
And I want to throw out there that I'm pretty neutral because I've never beaten either game.
I love Breath of the Wild when it came out. I love Tears of the Kingdom when it came out, but I think Tears of the Kingdom is better, and just that's my opinion.
I'm a little bit of a goofy guy because I have over 100 hours in Breath of the Wild and I never beat it. I'm just not good enough, I guess.
All right.
So, anyway, moving on to the next topic, bosses in the game. Which game has better bosses?
I mean, do we even have to talk about this? It's, I think it's pretty obvious to anyone who's played either game that Tears of the Kingdom bosses are better because they're actually unique. In Breath of the Wild, you've got your four blights. You've got water blight, wind blight, thunder blight, and fire blight.
Mm-hmm.
Fire blight Ganon, obviously, all of them having the same end title. But I mean, they just use the four elements that the four champions use, and I think that is, that's cool. But I would have liked for them to be a bit more unique, which I think is what they went for in Tears of the Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
Also, they have more kind of mini bosses in Breath of the Wild. I think you only had the Hinox, which are the big one-eyed giant dudes, and stone taluses.
There was
which
also
would
that
just
one thing in the Gerudo region. I forget what it's called. Like
Yeah, that
the worm.
that massive
whatever it
Molduga.
was.
sandworms. Yeah.
Molduga, yes.
Yeah,
Also,
it's like a
there's
sandworm.
centaurs. Uh,
Lionels.
yeah,
Yeah,
those
Lionel.
things.
Those aren't technically classified as mini bosses because
Yeah,
they don't
they
have
don't have
their
the health bar.
big health bar up on the screen.
I consider them mini bosses in my mind.
I mean, I think
They are difficult.
yeah, they're really hard to beat.
But Tears of the Kingdom added more. You've got the constructs, which are big cube men that can kind of use something similar to Link's Ultra Hand. You've also got the frocks, which are big frog things down in the depths. And the big addition, which is the Gleeok, a three-headed dragon. And there are multiple different types of that.
Well, I think a lot of the criticism Breath of the Wild kind of gets is bosses and dungeon diversification. Like people didn't really like the dungeons that much in Breath of the Wild, and people thought the bosses weren't as unique as they could be because they're just all different forms of Ganon. And I think that's valid criticism. I do think story wise, they do a good job of tying in the why these corruptions are like a part of Ganon. They took over the oh shoot, what are the champions like the oh
Divine
yes,
Beasts.
the divine beasts. Thank you. um, and they're using the power that was associated with the divine beasts. And I think story wise, they do a really good job of tying in these bosses and like it being a big emotional thing, especially since in a lot of these dungeons, bringing up to them have a lot of the descendants of the original champions. But I'm not going to say that they're that the lack of diversification of these bosses wasn't a problem. I do think that Tears of the Kingdom overall was more creative with its bosses and is better for it.
Well, that's a good segue to talking about dungeons as well.
Yeah, it is. I'll let Jarek take the floor on this one, actually.
Okay. I So Breath of the Wild, similar to its bosses, was criticized for having a lack of dungeon creativity. And every dungeon is one of the divine beasts that was piloted by the champions 100 years ago. And, lore wise, that makes sense. Also, in the DLC, I believe you had one extra dungeon, which wasn't very good.
I forgot
But
about
in Tears of
that.
the Kingdom, in Tears of the Kingdom, you've got, four dungeons again for fire, water, wind, lightning. And I think the gimmicks of these dungeons is better in some ways, worse in others. So kind of a problem that I had with the gameplay, I still have faults with this game, even though it's one of my favorites, is you actually have champions that follow you and help you in battle. But to access these, you have to kind of scramble around and press A on the one whose power you want to use, which is worse than using the champion powers in Breath of the Wild, where you pretty much just had to hold a button down. So the dungeons kind of rely on these champion abilities to kind of function. So let's just take, for example, the Water Temple. You have to use Sidon's ability, which is, water. If you click on him, you get water on your sword, and you clear away mud or muck or whatever it's called officially. And I think the design and the aesthetics are really cool in Tears of the Kingdom. Um, the gimmicks are kind of bad in both games. In Breath of the Wild, you use the map to kind of spin the dungeon in whichever way you wanted to help you solve puzzles. So, in my opinion, that left some kind of cryptic solutions. I think specifically, I remember the lightning divine beast spinning the three cylinders in the middle of the dungeon gave me a lot of trouble as a kid.
Yeah, me too. As Derek said, like the divine beasts, especially the lightning one, as Derek brought up, like weren't the greatest dungeons ever. Like because some solutions, as Derek said, were pretty convoluted. I think we have pretty similar opinions on the dungeons of Breath of the Wild. I don't think they're like the biggest highlights um, of Breath of the Wild, but as Jarek already kind of conceded, like the champion abilities that you get from Breath of the Wild, I do think are a little more effective and better than how the champion abilities. Although I don't think they're called champion abilities in Tears of the Kingdom, but how they work in Tears of the Kingdom, um, and I think um, Nintendo put so much effort into all the shrines being basically like rooms of a dungeon, kind of like isolated one room puzzles that kind of they wanted to replace all the different types of dungeons they would typically have in a Zelda game. And I think for some people that works, and for some people it doesn't. And if I remember correctly, they brought the shrines back in a different form in Tears of the Kingdom. So, um, in a way, I think um, they're trying to find a better balance between like the shrine system and having big dungeons uh, in Tears of the Kingdom. But I don't know how effective that was. But yeah, I think just in general, um, a lot of the big dungeons in Breath of the Wild weren't like outstanding or highlights of the game. So I'll readily concede that.
So I kind of want to touch on the shrines from Tears of the Kingdom a little bit since you brought that up.
Mhm.
A lot of them focus on Link's new abilities. Obviously, in Breath of the Wild, they focused on the Sheikah runes. You had bombs, magnesis, stasis, cryonis, and maybe another one that I'm forgetting about.
The only other one I can think of is camera. Yeah.
Camera. You don't ever have to use that one. Oh, there was also Amiibo.
Yeah.
Don't you have to use camera to do one quest, maybe,
Yeah, there's a
or a
quest.
couple?
Yeah, there's quest lines that use the camera, but not any shrines. Anyway, continue, Derek.
So yeah, a lot of these shrines focus on Link's new abilities, and I think there were also shrines in Breath of the Wild that were combat shrines, which is you just get into a room, there's an enemy you got to fight called a never mind, I don't remember. It was like a little guardian, but he wielded a sword and shield or sometimes a spear. But you had to fight him, and they basically copy and pasted that shrine a bunch of times. So there were a bunch of those throughout the game. Tears of the Kingdom also has combat shrines, but they are done in a different way, and I think a better way. In Breath of the Wild, there was a place called Eventide Island, where it took away all of your weapons, all of your equipment, all of your items, and instead of having this island return verbatim in Tears of the Kingdom, they adapted this idea into their combat shrines. So you have new shrines that will take away all of your equipment, but not for as long as it would have been gone had you been on Eventide. So I think shrines are a little bit better, and they're probably more creative because of how Ultra Hand. There's a lot of different solutions to shrines in Tears of the Kingdom.
Hmm. Um, I never really focused on the shrines that much. They weren't really like my cup of tea in Breath of the Wild. I did like enough to get the Master Sword, and I did the same in Tears of the Kingdom. But I will say adding more combat shrines in Tears of the Kingdom was definitely or yeah, it was definitely a good idea. I think a good next thing to talk about is like the the three different layers, if you will, of Tears of the Kingdom. The what's the Shadow World? What's the
The
yeah,
depths.
the depths. Thank you. The depths, the mainland, and then the Sky Islands.
Sure. What do you want to talk about?
The depths suck. I don't know if that's a controversial opinion. I do not like the depths. Um, and I don't think there were enough Sky Islands. I would have liked there to be more Sky Islands in Tears of the Kingdom. Um, Admittedly, my criticisms aren't like as in depth on this one as they probably should be. It's just I didn't really like them.
Um, yes and no. I think the depths are bad until you realize that it's just Hyrule inverted.
Hmm.
So whenever there's a mountain in Hyrule, it will be like a deep valley in the depths. And also whenever there's a body of water on Hyrule, it will be nothing. It will be a big wall in the depths. So like if there's a river, that'll separate two areas of the depths from each other. In terms of Sky Islands, yeah, there's not a lot to do in the sky. Like they kind of you've got the Great Plateau replacement,
Yeah.
and then the big lightning island up in the sky that you have to do like later in the game. So I can see that there's uh not a lot to the Sky Islands. I'm trying to think of what else to say about it because there's not a lot to say.
Yeah, like I said,
There's a
I just don't think there's like that much to say about about that topic. Just that like I don't think either were I guess the depths were probably executed better than I think they were, but I just think like there were a lot of like annoyingness tied around the depths, like just like the whole like dark mechanic and having to like light up every all the places and then having to deal with the replacement to the calamity goop from yes from Breath of the Wild, the dark thing. I don't remember what it's called.
oh, I completely forgot when we were talking about Guardians. They do have a Guardian replacement. They've got the Gloom hands.
Yeah, the gloom. That's what it's called.
Yeah, there's basically just a bunch of hands that'll pop up out of the ground in specific areas. That creeped me out when I first found it.
Hmm.
All right. I guess let's go into kind of our last topic for the day, and that's the story of the game. Which one do you guys prefer?
Pers- yeah, yeah. Personally, I uh, really enjoyed the execution of Breath of the Wild story a lot more than Tears of the Kingdom's execution. Um, uh, there's so if you've never experienced Breath of the Wild story, in a lot of ways you don't have to interact with it a ton if you don't want to, because there's a whole system of exploration based around you have these old photos on your Sheikah slate that were taken by Princess Zelda, and you have to go to these areas and they'll look familiar to Link, and then Link will have a realization and his memory will start coming back to him because Link has amnesia in this game, so he doesn't remember what happened before the 100-year time skip where he was being healed in the I think it's like the Chamber of Slumber or whatever. I don't 100% remember what it is called. Um, and um, you kind of collect these puzzle pieces of story, not only through word of mouth, through interacting with the characters and going from every uh, divine beast and collecting the stories and these cutscenes and the history of this Hyrule, but also the story is told through its environment a lot. To see the decay, and I already touched on this in my opening, the decay of the land and how things are. and you're kind of given a little bit of info by the opening MJC, the old man who turns out to be, I guess, spoilers if you haven't played Breath of the Wild, but uh,
It's 8 years old, man.
yeah, turns out to be the King of Hyrule, and he kind of gives you a little bit of information on what happened, and just everything fits together so well in the end in the puzzle piece that is the story when you unlock all the memories. And you get to see the downfall of Hyrule and how they tried to prevent it, and why Link was put away to sleep for so long to heal his injury that was given to him. And it's just such an emotional story, in my opinion, and it was executed so well from the landscape to the music to the cutscenes to the battles. Um, and the NPCs who are the descendants of these old champions, and just seeing the fallout of the destruction of the kingdom of Hyrule and everything that happened was just so much more impactful to me as a person compared to Tears of the Kingdom. Um, Although there is a big scene that I will admit is the best part of the story, which is realizing what happened to Zelda because Zelda's gone missing. That's a big part of the story, and it's not something I want to spoil since Talon doesn't know it, and it's a much newer game than Breath of the Wild. But I will say that's probably the strongest part of Tears of the Kingdom story to me. But early on, like your motivation to go and do things in the story, um, it just didn't feel as motivating to me because it's just like, oh, somebody's hearing Princess Zelda's voice in the castle and she's missing, but um, she's saying weird things and something and the castle is floating now, or I think yeah, that's what happens, and then you know, I will say this is a kind of a major spoiler, but oh, that wasn't actually Zelda. That was a fake.
Camera.
And to me, it was just not as impactful or well built as a story uh, in the ingenious way that Breath of the Wild does it, at least to me.
So I think the reason why I prefer Tears of the Kingdom as a story is because they put more emphasis on it. In Breath of the Wild, story is not required, I think, because a lot of it is told through these smaller details throughout the world. And you can pretty much go to Hyrule Castle straight when you get off the Great Plateau, and you'll know most of the story. You'll just be missing like the connections that Link had with Zelda, and that is a big part of the story, and I won't downplay that, but it is kind of told on the back burner, and that's one of the problems I have with Breath of the Wild story is that it's not the main focus when the games I enjoy are like very plot driven adventures. And that's kind of what Tears of the Kingdom does. And admittedly, that does make it worse as an open world game because, you have to do all these different things to get the whole story. But in a way, that also makes it better as an open world game because you have to explore the whole world to get the whole story. You know, uh, it's not really a spoiler, but Zelda at the beginning of the game is transported back, thousands of years to the founding of Hyrule, which like really messes with the Zelda timeline that was already established, but the Zelda timeline doesn't make any sense in the first place. So, she goes back in time, she meets like the first king and queen of Hyrule, and that's kind of like how you get most of the story. In the beginning of the game, you also meet Ganondorf below Hyrule Castle, so that kind of makes you wonder who is this Ganondorf? Why is he so withered? And what happened down here? That's kind of a major driving force. Is like what really happened beneath Hyrule Castle, and the moment Peyton mentioned earlier with what happens to Zelda in the past is probably the best scene between both of the games, and you really have to experience the whole world and the whole story to kind of get to that point. And then the ending as well is very good, in my opinion.
Well, I think in a way, in my mind at least. Like I'm like Jarek in the way that I really like plot in games and I love story driven games as well. And I think um, because of the environmental nature of Breath of the Wild, it's just done in a different way. Like it's storytelling and you're being driven by everything that's happening around you um, because it already happened in a way. It's you're still being driven by the story of the game, in my opinion, um, to go save Zelda because not only because of the King of Hyrule, but because you can physically ride around the world and see the destruction that had happened to the kingdom because of uh, Ganon, um, and you can physically see the the daunting uh, shape of Hyrule Castle throughout the whole map. Um, So I think, just in a way, it's just not in your face about it, but it is still really plot driven, just in a way without saying it.
I think to kind of like simplify my whole like argument that I said before is like in Breath of the Wild the story doesn't drive the experience, and
Mm.
that's kind of how it is in Tears of the Kingdom.
Yeah, and I get that.
You know, I'm gonna flip the script back on you, Talon, and I want to hear what your opinion is on these two games after hearing both of our arguments.
So I must say, I have found the arguments in favor of Tears of the Kingdom a little more convincing than the ones in favor of Breath of the Wild. I did have a slight bias coming into this because I played a lot of Breath of the Wild, as I said, over 100 hours, even though I've still never beaten it. And Tears of the Kingdom, I only had 3 hours. Um, After this, I'm a little more. Um, I feel more encouraged to go back and give Tears of the Kingdom a fair shot. Um, that's where I stand right now.
So that's Talon's stance, but you in the comment section can go tell us who you think won the
Yeah,
argument.
So
Engagement, baby.
I guess now we could probably just give our closing remarks if we wanted to, um, unless
Sure.
you have more points you want to bring up, Jarek.
Um, Not really. I mean, I just want to end by saying they're both great games. I think Tears of the Kingdom does better than Breath of the Wild, and I know, like, actually on the internet, a lot of people disagree with me because there is a big when Tears of the Kingdom came out, there was like a lot of hype for it. A lot of people loved the game, but as like it's been almost 2 years since Tears of the Kingdom, I would say after like the first year, there was a big shift where like suddenly everyone hates Tears of the Kingdom now, and I just don't really understand how that happened.
Mm.
So I like both games, and yeah, that's where I stand on it.
Yeah, I'd say my closing remarks really what it boils down to is how much you liked Breath of the Wild, but also what type of experience you really want to go for. Um, Kind of a lot of what my argument has um, been about is just how masterful the environmental storytelling and just the how masterful the um, environment of Breath of the Wild is. And by environment, I mean everything that it builds to kind of create a ecosystem of um, story, music, um, just its overall vibe. Um, and Tears of the Kingdom is different from that in a lot of ways. So, in many ways, they're both great games, but just Breath of the Wild is just what stands out more to me with the type of environment they created. Um, and I don't think there's anything wrong with Tears of the Kingdom necessarily, but just for me personally, it didn't live up to the hype when it came out, and I had so much years of hype up for Tears of the Kingdom, and it just didn't quite live up to it for me personally, but for others it did, and um, yeah, and at the end of the day, we're just two people debating on pieces of media and art, which is subjective, as we talked about in our last episode. So, you know, uh, nothing to get heated about or anything. Just, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, like we said, Peyton and I have debated over this like before. Like this is obviously our most in depth debate about this,
Mhm.
but we're still friends, even though we have differing opinions on these games.
Yeah.
And that's something we went into last episode. Talon, you got any closing remarks?
Nope.
All right, great input. So I think that's where we're gonna wrap it up. It might be a bit of a shorter episode this week, but still a good one. Let us know if you liked debates, and we might do more in the future.
Yeah, we've definitely got some beef to settle.
Big beef.
No.
Who knows? Maybe you can hear Talon's voice more in these debates.
Perhaps.
All right. Well,
Um.
thank you for tuning in, everyone.
So yeah. Join us next week, where for the first time in podcast history, we already have a topic chosen. We will be discussing everything revealed and talked about in the Switch 2 Direct that already happened when this video goes up. So look forward to it.
Yep.
Yep.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.